The champagne was getting warm, and my wife was 2 hours late for our anniversary dinner. I sat at our kitchen table, staring at the bottle of Dom Perignon I'd splurged on, the same brand we'd shared on our first date 7 years ago at Chez Laurent. The ice bucket had turned into a small lake on the mahogany surface, and I was starting to feel like the world's biggest fool. My name is Silas Orrin, and I fix things for a living. Engines, transmissions, electrical systems, anything with moving parts that decides to quit working. What I apparently can't fix is a marriage that's been running on empty for longer than I care to admit. Mara had called at 6:30, her voice tight with that particular brand of stress she reserved for big cases. "Emergency client meeting," she'd said. "Rain check on dinner? I'll make it up to you this weekend." Sure she would, just like she'd made up for the missed birthday dinner, the canceled vacation, and the dozen other times her law practice had taken priority over our life together. I'm not bitter. Okay, maybe I'm a little bitter, but I understand ambition. What I don't understand is why she'd insisted on making reservations at Chez Laurent if she knew she might bail. The text message arrived at 8:47 p.m. "She's here, not with you. Table 12. Sorry, man." The sender was Cedric Fallon, our usual waiter at Chez Laurent. We'd been roommates in college before I dropped out to take over my uncle's auto shop, and he went into hospitality. Good guy, terrible poker player, and apparently the bearer of news that would change everything. I stared at the message for a full minute, my brain refusing to process the implications. Then my phone buzzed again. A photo this time. The reservation book at Chez Laurent, open to tonight's page. There it was in black ink. Solon Mara, party of 2:07 p.m. Anniversary dessert, candles. Solon was Mara's maiden name, the one she used for her law practice. The one that appeared on business cards and court documents. The one she'd apparently used to book a table for two on our anniversary. Without me. I poured myself a glass of the expensive champagne and took a long sip. It tasted like regret and stupidity, with notes of, "You should have seen this coming." My hands were surprisingly steady as I pulled up our phone records online. Verizon keeps everything, and I'd been paying the family plan for years. It took me 20 minutes to find what I was looking for, and another 10 to wish I hadn't. The number appeared first on March 15th, 19 months ago. A 3-minute call during my business trip to Albany, then again on March 22nd, while I was stuck in traffic on Route 87. The pattern emerged like a roadmap of deception. Calls timed to my absences, texts during my commute, a relationship carefully threaded through the gaps in my schedule. I ran the number through a reverse lookup service. Damon Vossel, local real estate agent, recently divorced, drives a BMW that I'd probably worked on at some point. The kind of guy who wears cologne to the grocery store and calls women sweetheart, without irony. My phone rang. Cedric. "Silas, man, I'm really sorry about this." "How long?" I asked. "Tonight's the first time I've seen them together here, but..." He paused, and I could hear the restaurant noise in the background. "She's been different lately. Happier, you know? The way she was when you two first started coming in." That stung more than it should have. "What are they doing now?" "Sharing the chocolate souffle, same one you guys always get." She's laughing at something he said. I closed my eyes and tried to picture it. Mara in her black dress, the one I'd bought her for Christmas, leaning across table 12 while some smooth-talking realtor made her laugh, using our anniversary as cover for whatever this thing had become. "Cedric, I need you to do me a favor." "Anything, buddy." "Take a picture of them. Don't be obvious about it. I need to see what I'm dealing with." "Are you sure? Sometimes it's better not to." "I'm sure." The photo arrived 5 minutes later. Mara looked radiant, her hand resting on the table inches from his. Damon was everything I wasn't, polished, confident, the kind of man who probably had his shirts pressed by someone else. They looked like a couple celebrating an anniversary, which, in a way, they were. I spent the next hour digging through our joint accounts. The evidence was all there, hidden in plain sight like a magic trick performed by an amateur magician. Cash withdrawals totaling $67,000 over the past 2 years, always timed to my business trips. A credit card in Mara's maiden name that I'd never seen, billing to addresses I'd never visited. The biggest revelation came from our savings account. The money we'd been setting aside for Emery's college fund had been steadily disappearing. $2,000 here, $3,000 there, always with explanations I'd been too trusting to question. "Car repair," she'd said. "Emergency dental work. That conference in Boston." Lies. All of it. By the time Mara's key turned in the front door at 11:23 p.m., I had assembled a complete picture of her double life. The champagne bottle was empty, and the divorce papers I'd printed from a legal website were stacked neatly beside the ice bucket. She walked into the kitchen and stopped short when she saw me. Her cheeks were flushed, and she smelled like expensive wine and guilt. "Silas, what are you doing up? I thought you'd be asleep by now." "How was dinner?" I asked, gesturing to the empty chair across from me. "What dinner?" "I told you, I had a client emergency. We worked through dinner at the office." She was good. I had to give her that. The lie came out smooth as silk, without hesitation. "Funny thing," I said, picking up my phone and showing her Cedric's photo. "You look really happy for someone stuck in a conference room." The color drained from her face, but she recovered quickly. "Silas, I can explain." "I'm sure you can. You always were good with words. It's what makes you such a successful lawyer." I slid the divorce papers across the table. "But I'm not your client, and this isn't a negotiation." She stared at the documents like they might burst into flames. "You can't be serious." 19 months, Mara. $67,000. Table 12 at Chez Laurent on our anniversary. I stood up and walked to the sink, rinsing out my champagne glass with deliberate calm. "The only thing I can't figure out is why you married me in the first place." "I love you," she said, and for a moment she almost sounded like she meant it. "No," I replied, drying the glass with methodical precision. "You love the idea of me. The steady husband who pays the bills while you play house with your boyfriend. But that guy just resigned from the position." I left her sitting at the kitchen table with the divorce papers and walked upstairs to pack a bag. Tomorrow, I'd start the process of untangling 7 years of shared life. Tonight, I just wanted to sleep somewhere that didn't smell like betrayal and expensive perfume. The last thing I heard before closing the bedroom door was the sound of Mara crying. It might have been genuine, or it might have been another performance. At this point, I honestly couldn't tell the difference. I spent the night at the Riverside Motel, a place that charged by the hour and asked no questions. The irony wasn't lost on me. While my wife was probably explaining her evening to her boyfriend, I was staring at water stains on the ceiling and planning my next move. The auto shop opened at 7, and I was there at 6:30, nursing coffee that tasted like motor oil and going through the motions of normalcy. My business partner, Jake Morrison, found me under the hood of a Ford pickup, checking belts that didn't need checking. "You look like hell," he observed, lighting his first cigarette of the day. "Rough anniversary?" "Something like that." I straightened up and wiped my hands on a shop rag. "Jake, I need to ask you about something. You remember that company retreat Mara went to last year, the one where Grant was networking?" Grant was my older brother, the successful one who'd parlayed his MBA into a corner office at a consulting firm. He'd always been protective of Mara, maybe a little too protective. I'd chalked it up to brotherly concern, but now I was wondering if there was more to it. "Yeah, I remember. Some fancy resort in the Catskills?" "Why?" "Did Grant ever mention introducing Mara to anyone there? Maybe someone in real estate?" Jake's expression shifted. "Silas, what's going on?" I told him everything. The photos, the phone records, the money. Jake listened without interrupting, his cigarette burning down to ash between his fingers. "Damon Vossel," he said finally. "Yeah, I know the guy. Sold my ex-wife her condo after the divorce. Smooth talker, drives that blue BMW you worked on last month." The BMW. I remembered it now. Electrical problems with the sound system. The owner had been impatient, demanding, the kind of customer who acted like his time was more valuable than everyone else's. I'd fixed his car and charged him full price, plus a convenience fee for being difficult. "There's something else," Jake continued. "Grant's been asking questions about the shop, how much it's worth, whether you'd ever consider selling. I figured he was just being nosy, but now?" Now it made sense. Grant had always resented my success with the business, the way I'd built something from nothing while he climbed corporate ladders. If he could break up my marriage and convince me to sell, he'd get 2 kinds of satisfaction, personal and financial. My phone buzzed. A text from Mara. "We need to talk. Please come home." I showed it to Jake. "What do you think?" "I think you should let her sweat a little longer, but that's just me." He lit another cigarette. "You want some advice? Document everything. Get copies of all the financial records, save those text messages, keep a timeline of what happened when. If this goes to court, you'll need ammunition." He was right. I spent the morning gathering evidence, printing bank statements, and creating a folder that told the story of my marriage's slow collapse. The picture that emerged was both clearer and more complicated than I'd expected. Mara hadn't just been having an affair, she'd been planning an exit strategy. The cash withdrawals corresponded to apartment deposits and furniture purchases. The credit card bills showed a pattern of expensive dinners and weekend getaways, all carefully hidden from our joint accounts. But the most damning evidence came from her laptop, which she'd left connected to our home Wi-Fi. Her email history revealed months of correspondence with a divorce attorney, exploring her options for asset division and custody arrangements. She'd been preparing to leave me while I was planning anniversary dinners. The consultation notes were particularly enlightening. Mara had painted me as an absent workaholic who prioritized the business over family. She'd claimed emotional neglect and incompatible life goals. The attorney had advised her to document instances of my unreasonable behavior to strengthen her position in settlement negotiations. I was reading through her draft petition when my phone rang. Grant. Silas, we need to talk. Mara called me this morning, very upset. She says you're filing for divorce based on some misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Is that what we're calling it? Look, marriages go through rough patches. Maybe you two should try counseling before you do anything drastic. Grant, did you introduce Mara to Damon Vossel? The silence stretched long enough to confirm what I already suspected. It wasn't like that, he said finally. They met at the retreat, sure, but I wasn't trying to... Trying to what? Break up my marriage? Convince my wife she deserved better than her blue-collar husband? Silas, you're being paranoid. Myra loves you. This thing with Damon, it's just a mistake. People make mistakes. 19 months is a pretty long mistake, don't you think? Another pause. How did you... Never mind. The point is, you're throwing away 7 years over something that doesn't have to matter. Mara's willing to end it, work things out. You just have to be willing to forgive. Forgive. As if forgiveness was something I owed her, like a debt that had come due. As if 19 months of lies and financial deception could be erased with an apology and a promise to do better. Tell me something, Grant. When you encouraged her to pursue her happiness, or whatever corporate speak you used, did you think about what that would do to me? Or was destroying my marriage just collateral damage in your campaign to prove you know what's best for everyone? That's not fair. Fair? My voice rose loud enough to make Jake look up from the engine he was working on. You want to talk about fair? Fair would have been my brother having my back instead of playing matchmaker for my wife. Fair would have been 19 months of honesty instead of lies. Fair would have been Mara asking for a divorce before she started shopping for my replacement. I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking with anger, but my mind was clear for the first time in months. The people I'd trusted most had been working against me, and I'd been too naive to see it. Jake appeared beside me with 2 cups of coffee. Family meeting didn't go well? My brother's been playing puppet master, and my wife's been playing victim. They think I'm some kind of obstacle to our happiness that needs to be managed or removed. So what's your play? I looked at the evidence spread across my desk. Bank statements, phone records, email printouts, and legal documents. The story they told was clear. Mara and Grant had been planning my exit from their lives with the same careful attention they'd give to any business transaction. I'm going to give them what they want, I said, just not the way they expected to get it. The plan that took shape over the next few hours was simple, legal, and designed to expose the truth about who had really been the problem in our marriage. If Mara wanted to play victim, she'd need an audience, and I was going to make sure she got one. The private investigator I hired was a woman named Diana Chen, who operated out of a strip mall office between a nail salon and a tax preparation service. She had 20 years of experience with divorce cases and a reputation for thoroughness that came highly recommended by Jake's attorney. Cheating spouse cases are bread and butter, she explained, reviewing the evidence I'd brought her. But this one's interesting. Usually the cheater tries to hide the money trail. Your wife documented everything. Either she's incredibly sloppy or she wanted you to find out. What do you mean? Diana spread the bank statements across her desk like tarot cards. Look at the pattern. The withdrawals are large enough to notice, but not large enough to trigger automatic alerts. The credit card bills arrive at your home address, not a P.O. box. She's using her maiden name for the apartment lease, but it's in the same town where everyone knows her married name. She was right. For someone as smart as Mara, the trail she'd left was surprisingly obvious, almost like breadcrumbs leading me toward the truth. Maybe she wanted out, but couldn't bring herself to ask for a divorce directly, Diana continued. Some people sabotage their relationships instead of ending them cleanly. Less guilt that way? Or maybe she was setting me up to be the bad guy, make me the one who filed so she could play the abandoned wife. Diana nodded approvingly. That's more likely, given what you've told me about her lawyer consultation. She was building a narrative where you're the neglectful husband who couldn't forgive one mistake. Very smart, if it had worked. She agreed to take the case with a focus on financial documentation and timeline establishment. No surveillance, no dramatic confrontations, just a clear record of what had happened and when. While Diana worked on the official investigation, I started my own research into Damon Vossel. The internet made it easy to piece together his life. Divorced 2 years ago, no children, successful real estate practice specializing in luxury properties. His social media presence was carefully curated. Photos of expensive dinners, weekend trips to wine country, and professional headshots that probably cost more than I made in a week. What interested me more were the gaps in his online presence. No photos with Mara, despite 19 months of relationship. No check-ins at restaurants or hotels that matched her travel schedule. For a man who documented his breakfast choices, he'd been remarkably discreet about his personal life. I was scrolling through his LinkedIn profile when Cedric called. "They're back," he said without preamble. "Same table, but the vibe is different. She looks upset. He keeps checking his phone. You want me to listen in? Can you do that without being obvious? I'm a professional, Silas. Trust me." 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a voice message. Cedric had managed to record nearly 10 minutes of conversation while pretending to adjust nearby table settings. The audio quality was poor, but the content was clear enough. Mara's voice, tight with stress. "You can't just disappear. He's not stupid, Damon. He's going to ask questions." Damon's response was harder to make out, but I caught the key phrases. Temporary setback. And stick to the plan. "What plan?" Mara asked. "The plan where I file for divorce and we ride off into the sunset? That plan's ruined now. He knows about us, about the money. My lawyer says I'm lucky if I get half of anything." "Your lawyer doesn't know what she's talking about. We have documentation of his neglect, his obsession with work. Any judge will see that you were driven to seek companionship elsewhere." "Driven to seek companionship?" Mara's laugh was bitter. "Is that what we're calling it now? Because I'm pretty sure the legal term is adultery, and it doesn't matter why I did it." The conversation continued for several more minutes, but the important details were already clear. This wasn't a passionate affair that had gotten out of hand. It was a calculated plan to end my marriage while preserving Mara's financial position. The emotional neglect angle was their insurance policy, a way to justify her behavior and minimize the consequences. I played the recording for Diana the next morning. "This changes things," she said. "If they've been planning this for months, there might be other evidence. Hidden assets, fabricated documentation, maybe even witness coaching." "Witness coaching?" "Friends and family who'll testify about your terrible behavior as a husband. People who'll say they saw signs of trouble, that Mara confided in them about feeling neglected or unappreciated." The pieces clicked together. Grant's sudden interest in my business. Mara's sister asking pointed questions about our marriage during recent family gatherings. Even Emery, our daughter, who'd been making comments about my work schedule and lack of emotional availability. They've been building a case against me for months, I realized, getting people to notice problems that didn't exist, or at least didn't exist the way they are describing them. Diana nodded grimly. "It's more common than you'd think. The cheating spouse creates a narrative where the affair was inevitable, even justified. They recruit allies who'll support their version of events. So what do I do? We document their plan the same way they documented your supposed neglect. Every conversation, every financial transaction, every attempt to manipulate the narrative. Then we present it all at once before they have a chance to spin it." She handed me a small digital recorder. "Start carrying this everywhere. If anyone wants to have a heart-to-heart about your marriage, make sure you get it on tape. Legal in this state as long as you're part of the conversation." The recorder felt heavier than it should have, like it contained the weight of my marriage's collapse. But it also felt like hope, the first tool I'd had to fight back against people who'd been playing games with my life. That evening, I got the call I'd been expecting. Mara wanted to meet for dinner to discuss our situation like adults. She suggested Chez Laurent, table 12, the scene of her anniversary celebration with another man. "Actually," I said, "let's try somewhere new. How about that place downtown, the one with the open kitchen? I hear they have excellent acoustics." The recorder was in my jacket pocket when I arrived at the restaurant. Mara was already there, looking beautiful and nervous in equal measure. She'd chosen a corner table where we could talk privately, away from other diners. "Thank you for coming," she began. "I know this is difficult, but I think we can work through it if we're both willing to be honest." I smiled and pressed record. "Honesty sounds perfect. Why don't you start?" The restaurant Mara had chosen was called Harmony, one of those farm-to-table places where the servers recite the provenance of every ingredient and the ambient lighting costs more than most people's cars. She'd arrived early and claimed a corner booth that would give us privacy for what she probably imagined would be a tearful reconciliation. She was wrong about that. You look tired, she said as I slid into the seat across from her. Are you sleeping okay at that motel? Well enough. The rates are reasonable, and they don't ask awkward questions about why a married man needs a room by the week. She flinched at that, but recovered quickly. Silas, I know you're hurt. I know I made mistakes. But we can fix this if we both want to. The digital recorder in my jacket pocket was already running. Diana had coached me on conversation techniques, how to ask open-ended questions, how to let silence work in my favor, how to avoid leading statements that might compromise the recording's legal value. What kind of mistakes are we talking about? I asked. The thing with Damon, it didn't mean anything serious. It was just... She paused, searching for words that would minimize 19 months of deception. I was lonely. You were always working, always focused on the business. I needed someone to pay attention to me. $67,000 worth of attention? Her composure cracked slightly. That money was for us, for our future. I was investing in opportunities that would benefit both of us. Opportunities like an apartment in Portland, furniture for a place I've never seen, weekend trips to wine country while I thought you were at legal conferences. You've been spying on me. The accusation came out sharper than she'd probably intended. Going through my personal accounts, my private correspondence, that's not the behavior of a loving husband, Silas. And there it was, the pivot that Diana had warned me about. Mara was already shifting the narrative, making me the villain for discovering her deception instead of acknowledging the deception itself. I've been trying to understand what happened to my marriage, I replied. Turns out the answer was in our bank statements all along. The waiter appeared to take our order, and Mara forced a smile while requesting the salmon and a glass of Pinot Grigio. I ordered coffee and told him we'd need a few more minutes with the menu. This is exactly what I'm talking about, Mara said once we were alone again. You're so focused on the details, the money, the timeline, you're missing the bigger picture. Which is, we grew apart. It happens in marriages. People change, priorities shift. Instead of talking about it, instead of working together to reconnect, you buried yourself deeper in work, and I found connection elsewhere. It was a reasonable sounding explanation, the kind of thing that might play well in counseling or mediation. The problem was that it wasn't true, and I had evidence to prove it. When did we grow apart? I asked. Can you give me a specific time frame? It wasn't sudden, it was gradual over the past few years. You started working longer hours, taking on more complicated projects. We stopped talking about anything except schedules and logistics. That's interesting, because our phone records show we talked every day, sometimes for hours. We had dinner together at least 4 nights a week. We took 3 vacations together in the past 2 years. Her wine arrived, and she took a long sip before responding. Talking and communicating aren't the same thing. Being physically present and being emotionally available aren't the same thing. So you're saying I was emotionally unavailable? Yes, exactly. You were there, but you weren't really there. Do you know how isolating that feels? I leaned forward, genuinely curious. Isolating enough to justify a 19-month affair and stealing $67,000 from our joint accounts? I didn't steal anything. That money was as much mine as yours. To spend on another man? To fund a relationship you were hiding from me? To invest in my happiness? To create possibilities for a future that felt worth living? The honesty was startling, even if it wasn't the kind she'd intended. Mara had just admitted that our marriage, our life together, hadn't felt worth living, that she'd been planning an escape for over a year while pretending everything was normal. Did Grant know about your investment strategy? The question caught her off guard. What does Grant have to do with this? He introduced you to Damon. He's been asking questions about the value of my business. He called me yesterday to suggest that I was overreacting to your mistake. I made air quotes around the word. Seems like he's been pretty involved in your happiness project. Grant cares about both of us. He wants what's best for our family. Our family. That's interesting phrasing, considering you've been planning to leave it for over a year. Mara's phone buzzed, and she glanced at the screen reflexively. The contact name was visible for just a moment. D. Office. Damon's checking in? I asked. She turned the phone face down without responding. He's probably wondering how the negotiation is going, whether you're making progress on getting me to accept the victim narrative you two have been crafting. There's no narrative, Silas. There's just a marriage that stopped working and 2 people who handled it badly. 2 people? I thought I was the emotionally unavailable workaholic who drove you into another man's arms. What did you handle badly? The question hung in the air while she searched for an answer that would maintain her position without contradicting her previous statements. It was a lawyer's dilemma, how to acknowledge fault without admitting liability. I should have talked to you directly instead of seeking comfort elsewhere, she said finally. I should have insisted on counseling or separation before things got complicated. Complicated? Is that what we're calling fraud now? It's not fraud to use marital assets for personal expenses. It is when you hide those expenses from your spouse while planning to divorce him. It is when you create secret accounts and fake travel records to cover your tracks. Her phone buzzed again. This time she answered it. I can't talk right now, she said quietly. We'll discuss it later. But I'd heard enough of the other side of the conversation to recognize Damon's voice, and he didn't sound happy. Whatever timeline they'd established for this meeting, I wasn't following the script. He's getting impatient, I observed, probably wondering why you haven't convinced me to be reasonable yet. This isn't about Damon. This is about us. No, Mara. There is no us. There hasn't been for 19 months, maybe longer. What we're discussing now is how to divide the assets of a business partnership that one party has been embezzling from. Embezzling? Her voice rose loud enough to attract attention from nearby tables. You can't be serious. Unauthorized use of joint funds for personal benefit while concealing the transactions from the other account holder. What would you call it? She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her recalculating her approach. The reasonable, apologetic wife wasn't working. Time for a different strategy. Fine, she said. You want to play hardball? Let's play hardball. I have documentation of your neglect, your obsession with work, your inability to prioritize our relationship. I have witnesses who will testify about the problems in our marriage. Any judge will understand why I needed to seek companionship elsewhere. What witnesses? People who care about me. People who've watched you choose your business over your family for years. You mean people you've been coaching to support your version of events. People like Grant, who helped you meet your boyfriend. People like your sister, who's been asking leading questions about our marriage at family gatherings. The accusation hit home. I could see it in her expression, the momentary panic of someone whose careful plan was unraveling. You're paranoid, she said, but the conviction was gone from her voice. I'm informed. There's a difference. I stood up and left $40 on the table to cover her wine and my untouched coffee. The recorder in my pocket had captured everything I needed, her admissions about the money, her justifications for the affair, and most importantly, her acknowledgement that she'd been planning this for months. Where are you going? She asked. To talk to my lawyer. We'll let the professionals handle it from here. I was halfway to the door when she called after me. Silas, please, don't let it end like this. I turned back to look at her one last time. She was beautiful, successful, and completely convinced that she was the injured party in our marriage's collapse. In another life, maybe I would have believed her. It ended 19 months ago, I said. I'm just making it official. The recording would be transcribed and included in my divorce filing within the week. But first, I had other conversations to document, starting with my brother Grant, who apparently had some explaining to do. Grant agreed to meet me at Murphy's Pub, a dive bar near the industrial district where the beer was cheap and the conversations were private. He was already there when I arrived, nursing a whiskey and looking like a man who'd been dreading this moment. You sounded angry on the phone, he said as I took the seat across from him. Angry doesn't begin to cover it. I ordered a beer and activated the recorder in my jacket pocket. I want to understand something, Grant. When exactly did you decide that my marriage was your business to manage? He took a long sip of whiskey before answering. It's not like that. Then what is it like? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you introduced my wife to her boyfriend, encouraged their relationship, and then tried to convince me to forgive her when I found out. That sounds like management to me. Mara was unhappy. Anyone could see that. Anyone except her husband, apparently. Why didn't you talk to me about these concerns? Would you have listened? You were so focused on the business, so proud of your success. When was the last time you asked Mara how she was really doing? The question stung because it contained a grain of truth. I had been focused on the auto shop, proud of building something from nothing. But that didn't justify what had happened next. So you decided to fix her unhappiness by setting her up with another man. I didn't set them up. They met at the retreat, hit it off on their own. I just didn't discourage it. You didn't discourage your brother's wife from having an affair? Grant's face flushed red. It wasn't an affair at first. It was friendship. Someone who listened to her, paid attention to her interests. You should be grateful someone was taking care of her emotional needs. Her emotional needs? I repeated the phrase slowly, letting its implications sink in. Is that what we're calling it? Look, I know this is hard to hear, but Mara needed more than you were giving her. Damon understood that. He made her feel valued, appreciated. When was the last time you took her somewhere nice just because you wanted to spend time with her? Our anniversary. Oh wait, she was busy that night, having dinner with her boyfriend at our restaurant. Grant shifted uncomfortably in his seat. That was poor timing, I'll give you that. But the point stands. Your marriage was in trouble long before Damon came along. According to who? Did Mara tell you she was unhappy, or did you decide that for yourself? She didn't have to tell me. It was obvious. The way she talked about you, about your relationship, always making excuses for why you couldn't attend social events, why you were working late again, why you'd rather tinker with engines than have a real conversation. The picture was becoming clearer. Grant hadn't just failed to discourage Mara's affair. He'd actively enabled it by validating her complaints and providing justification for her behavior. How long have you been in love with her? I asked. The question hit him like a physical blow. His whiskey glass froze halfway to his lips, and for a moment, his carefully constructed rationalization crumbled. I'm not. You are. You've been in love with my wife for years, maybe since the day I introduced her to you. All this concern about her happiness, her emotional needs. It's not about what's best for her, it's about what's best for you. That's ridiculous. Is it? You introduced her to Damon because you knew he wasn't serious competition. A divorced real estate agent with commitment issues? He was perfect for breaking up my marriage without creating a permanent obstacle to your own plans. Grant's silence confirmed what I'd suspected. This wasn't about Mara's happiness or my failures as a husband. It was about my brother's decade-long obsession with a woman he couldn't have. Did you really think it would work? I continued. That Mara would leave me for Damon, get tired of him after a few months, and then turn to you for comfort? That you'd be the stable, reliable choice after she'd gotten the excitement out of her system? You don't understand what she needs. And you do? Better than you, apparently. I listen when she talks. I remember the things that matter to her. I don't treat her like a convenient accessory to my real priorities. The accusation hung in the air between us, and I realized that Grant actually believed it. He'd convinced himself that I was a negligent husband and he was a concerned friend. The affair was just collateral damage in his campaign to prove that he deserved Mara more than I did. Tell me about the money, I said. What money? The $67,000 Mara withdrew from our joint accounts. Did you help her hide it? Provide financial advice on how to move assets without triggering automatic alerts? Grant's expression shifted again, this time towards something that looked like panic. I don't know anything about that. Really? Because you've been asking questions about the value of my business, wondering if I'd ever consider selling. That sounds like someone who's been thinking about asset division. I was concerned about your financial situation. Divorce is expensive, especially when one party has been stealing marital assets for over a year. Mara didn't steal anything. Those were legitimate expenses. Legitimate expenses for what? An apartment I've never seen? Furniture for a relationship I didn't know existed? Weekend trips disguised as business travel? Grant finished his whiskey and signaled the bartender for another. His hands were shaking slightly, and I could see sweat beading on his forehead despite the bar's air conditioning. You're making this more complicated than it needs to be, he said finally. Mara made some poor choices, but she's willing to end things with Damon and work on your marriage. All you have to do is forgive her. Forgive her for what exactly? The affair, the lies, the theft? Or should I forgive you for orchestrating the whole thing? I didn't orchestrate anything. I wanted her to be happy. No, Grant. You wanted her to be available. There's a difference. I stood up and left money on the table for both our drinks. Grant looked up at me with an expression that mixed guilt, anger, and something that might have been desperation. Where does this leave us? He asked. It leaves you exactly where you started, wanting something you can't have, and willing to destroy other people's lives to get it. The recording from Murphy's pub would be the final piece of evidence Diana needed to complete her investigation. Grant's admissions about enabling the affair, combined with Mara's recorded justifications for the financial deception, painted a clear picture of conspiracy and fraud. But more importantly, they revealed the true scope of the betrayal. This wasn't just about a cheating wife, it was about a systematic campaign to end my marriage while preserving the conspirators' reputations and financial interests. I drove home to the house I'd shared with Mara for 7 years, knowing it would be one of the last times I'd see it as anything more than a piece of property to be divided. The divorce papers were still on the kitchen table where I'd left them, along with the empty champagne bottle and melted ice bucket. Tomorrow, I would file those papers and begin the legal process of ending my marriage. But tonight, I wanted to sit in the silence and remember what it had felt like to trust the people I loved before I learned how much that trust had cost me. The house felt different now, not like a home, but like a crime scene where the evidence was finally being collected, And in a way, that's exactly what it was. The divorce proceedings moved faster than anyone expected, including Mara's attorney. Diana's investigation had produced a comprehensive timeline of the affair, complete with financial records, recorded conversations, and documented evidence of Grant's involvement. What should have been a contentious battle over asset division became a straightforward case of marital fraud. Mara's lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia Morse, requested a settlement conference 2 weeks after I filed the papers. We met in a sterile conference room at her law firm, with Diana present as my advocate and Mara looking smaller somehow than she had at the restaurant. "My client is prepared to make a generous offer," Patricia began, sliding a folder across the table. "She'll accept a 60-40 split of marital assets in your favor, with shared custody of your daughter and no request for spousal support." I glanced at the proposal without opening it. What about the $67,000 she stole from our joint accounts? Those were legitimate marital expenses. For an extramarital relationship. Diana interrupted. "We have documentation showing that every withdrawal was used to fund my client's wife's affair. Apartment deposits, furniture purchases, travel expenses, gifts for her boyfriend, none of it benefited the marriage." Patricia's composure slipped slightly. "The emotional neglect my client experienced justifies—" "Nothing," I said. "It justifies nothing. You can't steal from your spouse because you're unhappy." The conference lasted 3 hours, with Patricia gradually reducing her demands as Diana presented evidence that contradicted each of Mara's claims. The emotional neglect defense crumbled when we produced phone records showing daily communication. The gradual estrangement theory fell apart when confronted with credit card receipts for shared dinners and activities. By the end, Mara was staring at the table while her attorney negotiated damage control. "My client is willing to repay the disputed funds," Patricia said finally. "All of them, plus interest," Diana replied, "and we want a signed statement acknowledging that the withdrawals were unauthorized." That's essentially an admission of theft, because that's what it was. The final settlement gave me 70% of our marital assets, full ownership of the auto shop, and primary custody of Emery. Mara would repay the stolen funds over 2 years and cover all legal expenses. In exchange, I agreed not to pursue criminal charges for the financial fraud. It was more than fair, it was justice. The papers were signed on a Thursday afternoon in October, exactly 6 months after Cedric's text message had changed everything. Mara left the law office without speaking to me, but I caught her in the parking lot. "I'm sorry," she said, and for the first time since this began, she sounded like she meant it. "For which part?" "All of it. The affair, the money, the lies. I convinced myself I was justified, but I wasn't. I was just selfish." "What about Grant?" Her expression hardened. "Grant got what he deserved. When I ended things with Damon, he thought that meant I'd turn to him for comfort. He was wrong." I'd heard through mutual friends that Grant had been transferred to his company's Denver office after some unspecified interpersonal conflicts at work. Apparently, his obsession with Mara had extended to inappropriate behavior toward other female colleagues. "Where will you go?" I asked. "Portland, probably. I have some connections there, and it's far enough away to start over." She walked toward her car, then turned back. "Silas, I hope you find someone who appreciates what you have to offer." "I should have." I watched her drive away, feeling something that wasn't quite closure, but wasn't quite regret either. The woman I'd married was still in there somewhere, underneath the lies and justifications and desperate schemes, but she was also someone I didn't know anymore, someone I probably never had known. Emery took the divorce harder than I'd expected, but better than I'd feared. She was angry about the disruption to her college plans, hurt by her mother's deception, and confused about Grant's role in everything. But she was also 19 years old and resilient in the way that young people can be. "Are you okay?" she asked me one evening as we ate dinner at the kitchen table that had once held champagne and divorce papers. "I'm getting there," I said. "Are you?" "I think so. It's weird, you know? Finding out that your whole family was basically a lie. Not all of it. You were real. The good parts were real." She smiled, and I could see Mara in her expression, but also something that was entirely her own. "Dad? Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Are you going to start dating again?" The question caught me off guard. I hadn't thought much about the future beyond surviving the present. "Eventually, maybe. Why?" "Because you deserve to be happy. Really happy, not just pretending everything's fine while other people take advantage of you." Out of the mouths of babes. 6 months later, I ran into Cedric at the grocery store. He'd left Chez Laurent to open his own catering business, and he looked happier than I'd seen him in years. "How's the divorce treating you?" he asked. Better than the marriage did, toward the end. Any regrets about how you handled it? I thought about that question for a moment. I could have handled it differently. Confronted Mara directly, tried counseling, accepted her explanations, and forgiven the affair. But those alternatives would have required me to ignore what I'd learned about the people I trusted most. No regrets, I said. Sometimes the truth is ugly, but it's still better than a beautiful lie. Cedric nodded approvingly. You want some advice? Next time you fall in love, make sure it's with someone who orders dessert on the first date. Life's too short to spend it with people who don't appreciate the good stuff. I laughed, and it felt good to laugh about something related to romance again. I'll keep that in mind. The auto shop was busier than ever, probably because people in small towns love a good story, and mine had become local legend. I'd become the guy who'd caught his cheating wife and brother in an elaborate scheme, documented everything, and won a decisive victory in divorce court. It wasn't the reputation I'd have chosen, but it wasn't the worst thing to be known for. On the anniversary of Cedric's text message, I drove past Chez Laurent around dinner time. Table 12 was occupied by a young couple sharing champagne and looking at each other like they'd invented love. The sight made me smile instead of hurt, which felt like progress. I went home to the house that was finally just mine, opened a beer, and sat on the back porch watching the sun set over the river. Somewhere in Portland, Mara was probably building a new life with someone else's money and someone else's trust. Somewhere in Denver, Grant was probably still convinced that he'd been trying to help, but here in this small town, in this house, with this business I'd built from nothing, I was exactly where I belonged. The truth had cost me a marriage, but it had given me back my life. And that, I decided, was a fair trade.